I actually didn't create Pause Magazine. I inherited my editorship at Pause Magazine about 6 years ago. So I'll start a little bit with my story and then move on to what we all are going to do here this week. And much like Dr. Diefenbach, I'd love to make this an interactive session. So I'm going to talk very briefly and then we'll have a conversation. So Pause Magazine was founded about 18 years ago by a man, Sean Strube, who was living with HIV in New York and who felt and knew that the community didn't have enough information, basic information about how to survive the disease, how to live with it. And so flash forward, all of the 2.5 decades, I now run it and have been there about 6 years. I found out I was living with HIV in 1996 while I was already a journalist. And years ago, I wanted to be, as a very young journalist, a war correspondent. And through my career, worked at different magazines and ended up a war correspondent of sorts, working on this particular issue. What I thought I'd like to talk about today is the role of media, which you all know because you all do it every day. But at this particular point in time and on this particular issue, I would say there's probably never been a time when the media is more critical in our ability to turn the tide on the epidemic. There has been widespread global awareness of this issue for many, many years, and as others have talked about, it's an issue that is complicated. It's an issue that people are tired of hearing. It's an issue people are tired of talking about. There's a lot of confusion about where we are in the pandemic, and quite frankly, it's a difficult thing to write about because, on the one hand, yes, there's good news. It's a manageable chronic condition and you can live well. On the other hand, it's a massive tragedy that leads to death and disease and death for those who can't access care. So as a journalist who tries to frame this every day, I think about it this way. We've come so far and it's important to have hope, but at the same time, we have an enormous task in front of us. With 28 million people, or 26 million if we go with the 8 million in care number, not accessing care, that's horrific. That's really bad news. And it's worse news because we actually know how to treat people, keep them alive, and that treatment doubles as prevention. So if even in the United States, we have 750,000 Americans not accessing care. Carl referenced the 1 in 5 who don't know their status. But many people who know their status, who've been tested, are not accessing care in America. If there were 750,000 people with SARS or Ebola living with this disease in the United States or around the world, and we had the treatment and we weren't getting it to them, it would be front page news in the New York Times. The stigma around HIV penetrates even into the media itself. And as a journalist who is both someone writing about the disease and also someone who appears in the media, I can tell you that a lot of people don't, in the media themselves, have issues of stigma around HIV, and or don't, but are afraid to write about it. So the role of your coverage of HIV will really, really help us change where we are today. There's a big job to do in terms of reframing the issue. I think we need to build new excitement. We have so much good news. We have so much insight scientifically, not only on treatment and what it can do in positive and negative people, but also in terms of where we are in terms of cure and vaccine research. And I think the other issue, which is critical, and I don't know if it's come up before today, so I apologize if it has, is the issue of criminalization. Every day at Pause, we clip the news around the world. And there are so many stories of people being criminalized for their HIV status or alleged non-disclosure of their HIV status. It's become such an issue that it is in itself a barrier to testing and care. So this is also an issue that I hope will come up in this meeting, and also one that you are aware of and want to talk about, because it is keeping a lot of people who would otherwise get tested and linked to care from care. I think, in a public health crisis, the role of journalists is to report the news as it is, but I think also to bend and shape minds. And I think that, with HIV, we have an opportunity now to do that. The theme of the conference is turning the tide, but Carl made an excellent point that we have not turned it yet. And what happens this week in the media will play a very large role in the political response and the global economic response to this. So there has never been a more important time, I don't think, in AIDS journalism than this coming week. And I want to open this up to questions, but I'm here all conference, and our website is bbg.gov, and you can find our contact information there, and I can give you my contact information when I leave. But I'd be happy to help any of you. We have so many stories and so many thoughts on how to cover this. So if any of you want to come to us during the conference, we'll be in the media center, and if you're not in the media center, which I'm sure you will be, you can find us other ways. So happy to help you throughout the conference. We have an enormous staff here with us, so any way we can provide assistance, we'd be happy to. So I just want to say thank you for being here. Thank you for covering HIV/AIDS. Your coverage will help save the lives of tens of millions of people whose lives hang in the balance of the story not being told enough, not being told correctly, and not being framed in a way that grabs people's attention. So let me just open it up for questions, and we'll start there.
Hello.
Hello.
Well, on behalf of a lot of journalists in South Africa, I want to admit something that you said today, that it took a lot of people's deaths in my own family for me to be passionate about AIDS issues and HIV and so forth. And I'm married for 3 years, and my partner has been diagnosed with HIV for 4 or 5 years. And today, actually, he's starting his antiviral medication. And I'm not there with him. I'm very sad about that. But then I want to admit that it takes something like what I'm telling you now to be actually passionate about reporting objectively, and at the same time being an advocate for HIV issues and getting treatment and so forth. So it's a serious problem, especially in Africa, that people are very scared of reporting about things like that because of stigma. And I call it a roadblock to the cure for AIDS, a roadblock to well-being of African citizens and people around the world. So I'd like to admit what you said, and thank you for what you said.
You're welcome. Well, when I speak to school children a lot, they're young and their minds haven't been imprinted with a lot of the stigma that is associated with HIV. And one of the things that I say is, this is a disease that is sexually transmitted and transmitted other ways, but it is ultimately a disease of the immune system. People get confused, and I think they're uncomfortable with HIV because it makes them think about sex, and a lot of people are uncomfortable talking about sex. But I have a theory that most people actually want to talk about sex and be given the license to talk about sex calmly and openly. And I found that children, especially young people that I talk to in America and actually all over the world, are grateful for basic information. I mean, this is a very basic part of life, right? That hopefully we all get to take part of, or take part in it at some point. And I make this point that I had sex and the virus happened to be present. That doesn't make me a bad person, a dirty person, or a derelict person. It makes me a biologically unlucky one. I was foolish. I chose to have sex without a condom. It was a calculated risk. I knew the person. I didn't think he was HIV positive. I asked him. He said he wasn't, and he didn't know that he was. So I think what we have to do, we've done it with breast cancer. We've done it with other topics. We can change people's minds. I do not accept that we cannot change the perception of this disease. It is it is a retrovirus. That is all it is. It is actually a beautiful, beautiful creation of nature, and the virus is only doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is trying to survive no matter what we do to it. But it is just a piece of biology. And I think we have to separate these things in people's minds. It is not sex. Sex is a vector through which the virus can pass, but that's where it starts and ends. Now we have a disease of the immune system. And there's no reason that anyone should be afraid to talk to me about my disease because it's HIV. If I had cancer or leukemia, they would not be afraid to talk to me about that. So we have to tell people this is just a disease. It's just another virus. That's all it is. There's no reason for the hysteria. And even if we tie something to sex, there's also no reason for hysteria around sex. We're all here because someone had sex. And I think that's great. So I think we have to open up people's minds and but it's not easy to talk about sex. I mean, when I first came to Pause Magazine, I don't think I'd ever said penis to myself, let alone to anyone else, let alone in a room like this. But my own mom, we're very close, but we had never talked about sex. I mean, the sex talk was don't have it. And obviously I didn't pay any attention to her, but the sex talks that we've had over the years have shown me that you can talk about something a lot and it becomes not that scary. I wrote a blog the other day and I was talking about HIV/AIDS and how many times I said it. And when I first said the words AIDS or HIV, I was terrified. Now I say it like it's no big deal, and I forget that I'm openly disclosed. And so I'll be in the grocery store at dinner and I'll mention that I'm living with HIV, and people are kind of stunned, and I have to remember that this is shocking news. But it shouldn't be shocking news. It shouldn't be shocking news any more than me saying I have another type of illness. So I do think that helping people and giving them license to talk about sex without hysteria is really important, and that's a piece of this. So don't be afraid to talk about sex in your pieces.
Regan, there is something that I think is important too, that you as an editor and writer know very well. The importance of being clear, direct, precise, and verify the sources of information you're going to use. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. You mean in terms of sourcing?
In terms of sources and how you manage the information you received.
Right.
As a reporter, you have to be very clear.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I have some very experienced staff and young staff as well, as we all do. And it's a changing world. So one of my staff said to me a couple years ago, I asked if they had checked a fact, and they're like, yeah, I checked Wikipedia. I'm like, Wikipedia is not a source. Wikipedia is a collective intake valve on the web. But it's true. We have to be very discerning and very, very helpfully skeptical when we're hearing information, obviously. I'm trying to remember the quote. I think it's, skepticism is the chastity belt of the intellect. And I think that any good journalist, the instinct, of course, when you hear good news or a story is to want to jump on it and write it. But I do encourage everyone to question the source, to make sure that you know the angle and the agenda of the group or individual who's putting the information out there. A healthy skepticism is important. And these are complicated issues. PrEP is a good example. And last year before the conference, I posted a blog on pre-exposure prophylaxis that provided a counterpoint to some of the mainstream thinking, and it was fascinating to watch the response. Many people were in one camp. And at that time, I put forward a couple of just questions or thoughts that weren't sort of in the mainstream. And I got a lot of blowback, and I got a lot of pressure to not sort of go down those paths. And I realized I had kicked a hornet's nest, and that made me want to raise those issues all the more. And since that time, many more people have brought those issues up. They're just, we have to do 360 reporting on everything. So I think that we were on the calls with the White House earlier this week. There's a lot of good news, and the president has recently supported healthcare in America for HIV-positive people. That's terrific. But we can't tell the good stories without remembering that there's a flip side, and we have failed to deliver care to 750,000 Americans with HIV and 26 or 28 million people globally. So we need to tell both sides of the story, and I think keep a healthy perspective, even as we deliver good news.
My last question. Talk a little bit about confidentiality. It happens to me that I'm in a hospital in one of my countries doing a training, and we are with a group of reporters, all of a sudden come into a hospital. And the cameraman starts shooting openly. They haven't requested permission to the hospital manager. We don't know the persons that are there, doctors and patients. How much is the responsibility of the reporter in situations like this when you're talking to a lot of people in a hospital, and you haven't protect the people there?
Yeah. Well, I think in particular, as a reporter on HIV/AIDS, I think all journalists have the obligation of protecting their subjects from themselves in some cases. I think, for example, knowing the legal parameters, knowing about privacy has been very interesting for us at PAUSE. We have many people who want to come forward and tell their stories. But for example, they think they could tell their story online and no one will ever hear it or see it. Or they think that they can use a false name and no one will ever find out. So we always go to great lengths to make sure that anyone that we talk to and report on understands that if you talk to the press at all, it could be everywhere, and they should assume that it could make front page of New York Times. As far as being in the hospital and being in clinical settings, I mean, obviously you have to ask permission, and I think you always have to have release forms for everyone that you talk to. But another crazy thing is just making sure someone's actually HIV positive. I know this sounds crazy, but we do require proof of HIV status. And it's weird because it almost seems like you don't want to discriminate. Why would you ask someone if they're HIV positive when they're claiming that they are HIV positive? But we have an even-handed policy. We would fact check everything. So you know, there's no exception because you're HIV positive. When I was on the Oprah Winfrey show, they made me show my lab work to prove that I'm actually living with HIV. So again, I think normalizing the approach to the subjects and to the subject itself is key. This is a subject just like any others. There are no special rules other than, obviously, protecting people's privacy in a medical setting, which is, I think, what you're asking about. I mean, obviously, you want to be sensitive and protect them. Great. Hi.
Hi, I'm Greg Trotter with the AIDS Foundation of Chicago. I was interested in what you said about how it's the reporter's responsibility to report the facts, but also to kind of shape the conversation. Where do you find that line between journalism and advocacy? I mean, it would seem that if you're advocating too much, it's no longer journalism. And is that something that you guys kind of struggle with at Pause Magazine, or not struggle with, but are kind of keenly aware of?
It's a great question, and the tension is really, really important. You know, I think there's no question that we're an advocacy publication. All journalism is advocacy. I mean, even if you don't take a stand, you're choosing through the process of an edit to deliver some information and not other information. So even subconsciously, you are making decisions throughout the entire journalism process where you are angling something one way or another. We have basic rules of engagement. We try to be relatively bipartisan, and we try to keep the needs of our target audience sort of at the top of our minds. So our service is to our readership. We are trying to deliver as much accurate information as we possibly can to our audience so that they can make up their own minds about how to live their lives and the decisions that they're going to make. You know, it is hard not to be opinionated, but thank God for blogs, because I get to say whatever I want in my blog. So in the magazine, we try to walk the line. We realize we have a very diverse audience. I mean, quite frankly, Pause reflects the epidemic, and the virus has touched every kind of person in every place in the world. So we have conservative, evangelical Christians. I have Catholic priests who are HIV positive reading Pause. I have school children, who are young. I have every type of reader. So we do try to deliver the information as even-handedly as possible and let readers make up their own minds. But at the same time, there is a place, and I think, in your decision-making where advocacy drives it, and that's what stories you choose to tell, how far you go, and who you choose to tell the story through, and then let them, I think that's it, really picking your subjects and letting the words come through your subjects. It's tempting as the writer to sort of weigh in on the editorial voice and give your own opinion. It's harder to step back, but if you pick the right subjects, they'll say the things that you are thinking perhaps, or that you want to daylight. So, and then blogs, of course, are clearly your own opinion, so that's a whole different bowl of wax. That's great. Thank you, and let me help you in any way I can. Oh, sorry.
What is your target audience, and what are some of the challenges you face doing some of your stories?
Well, again, our target audience has become so diverse and broad that one of the challenges with so few pages in the print product, we have a lot of room online, is making everyone feel like the magazine is for them, or that we've given everybody enough information. I hear, oh, you don't have enough women, you don't have enough gay men, you don't have enough youth, you don't have enough older people, or people of color, or so if everyone's mad at me, I feel like I'm doing my job because there's not enough information for everyone. So we try to deliver a wide spectrum, but the best way to explain this is when we were thinking about the website, you come to the website. Now, you might be a teenage African-American woman who's straight, or a 57-year-old white gay man in Europe. Like, you might be any of these things. Am I delivering information to you because you're a man, because you're white, because you're gay, because you're straight? You're just a person. So I think we don't really silo information. We just try to tell great stories, give great information, and hope that it's broadly applicable. There are things in every story that I think are valid for and relevant to every person living with HIV, even if that person is not exactly identified with the person in the story or the specifics of their lifestyle. So, does that answer your question? I'm not sure. Okay. Omar, you wanna go?
I think I have a comment that you might agree with in response to his question about fine line between journalism and advocacy. I think in journalism we have a term called embedded journalism. You know, those journalists who are embedded in the war with the one side. I think as journalists we have a civic duty to be embedded with the war against HIV and AIDS. And so that would be our little contribution towards the fight against AIDS.
Yes, and one word on that. I think if you don't have a personal connection to HIV or you don't know someone with HIV, really do get to know some people with HIV. I think, standing back and reporting on a topic is never as effective as coming to it from a personal or personally related experience. And every good journalist can embed, literally or figuratively themselves in this process. And just last word. People with HIV are so willing to tell their story. I hear all the time in the mass media, we can't find people to go on TV. I'm like, I have hundreds of people who would love to tell their story. So just by telling someone's story, you're delivering the truth and feeling like you're embedded. So thank you very much for the work that you do. And again, if I can help at all during the conference, I'm at your disposal.